So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session about open access books and how to integrate them into the acquisition and cataloging processes. We have a panel today, and I'm happy to present my two colleagues here on this panel, which are Jeff Edmunds, who is the digital coordinator at Penn State University Libraries, and Jennifer Meekhof, who's the Associate Director for Technical Services at University of Michigan Library. My name is Niels Stern. I'm Director of the OAPEN Foundation and co-director of the Directory of Open Access Books. And today we have 40 minutes for this session. We look forward to do 3 presentations, and then after those presentations, we will open for the questions and answers session. And please feel free to enter any question into the chat on Pathable. And also, we hope to receive questions from the audience live at Charleston. So without further ado, I will begin with the first presentation and start by just briefly introducing what OAPEN Foundation is about. We are providing infrastructure services to enable open access to scholarly books. And our mission is to increase the discoverability of open access books and to build trust around them. And we do this by providing 3 services: the OAPEN Library, the Directory of Open Access Books, and the OA Books Toolkit, which is an information resource with a lot of information about open access book publishing. The OAPEN Library was built as a publication platform by 6 university presses in 2007-8. I was one of those university presses then, and the idea for us was to come together to increase the dissemination of our scholarly peer-reviewed books, and building this platform together helped us in doing that. Then in 2010, the project finished and it was turned into a foundation, a non-profit foundation based in the Netherlands, and opening up the doors to all scholarly publishers. And today we host over 18,000 peer-reviewed books from more than 370 publishers worldwide. The books are in many different languages and represent many different publishers, from the scholar-led university presses to the big commercial publishers. We host books on the DSpace in a platform, which is an open source platform, and we provide distribution and also preservation through Portico. And the DSpace platform is well suited to integrate with library catalogs through metadata feeds, through harvesting, and through the use of our open API. And we've seen a significant growth of books, downloads, of usage over the last few years. So in 2020, just beyond 5 million. And in September, we already hit the 8 million mark. So increasing usage, probably also due to the pandemic. And the coverage, the usage, the downloads come from all over the world. Now, today we are focusing primarily on the Directory of Open Access Books, which was launched by OAPEN in 2012, and today is operated jointly with Open Edition in France. We see DOAB as an international hub for peer-reviewed open access books. We have a lot of publishers coming in from many parts of the world, and we work with trusted platforms like Shello in South America, Project News in North America, and other platforms as well, including OAPEN. All metadata feeds coming from DOAB are public domain, and DOAB sits on the same technical platform as OAPEN, with the same integration potential and possibilities as the OAPEN library. Just to show you quickly a sort of a basic overview of the metadata flows, which is quite important also for this session. So we get metadata in from the publishers in a variety of ways, variety of formats, from publishers using ONNX 3 or ONNX 2.1. Some publishers send us Excel templates, upload via FTP service, even emails. So some of what we get in, we can automatically integrate, and some we have to also do a little bit of hand work with. So entering that information into the databases, we then get these output formats that I just showed. And when we look at the output side, we then push through the metadata into the intermediaries like OCLC, Ex Libris, ProQuest, EBSCO, and a lot of these intermediaries then provide knowledge bases, which libraries use, of course. So we try to make our metadata come through those intermediaries as good as possible. We know that it's not always optimal, but we strive to do that. And then we also are being harvested by and scraped by Google Scholar. We have very close relationship with Google Scholar to ensure that our metadata are properly presented there. And other databases like OpenAir and Base also make use of it. Of course, libraries also directly ingest our publications, and we know that more than 1,100 libraries actually do so in one way or another. In progress, we have a new service coming up, which is called the certification service, which relates to the quality assurance processes. And certification is, or peer review is, of course, paramount to what we do, so to ensure high quality standards of the books. And the certification service is a way to increase trust around OA books. And what we provide is to give publishers possibility to display the information about the peer review procedure in the metadata of the book. And we have a scientific committee set up to help us in this process, which we hope to have in operation during next year. And just a brief overview of how that works. So we have publishers coming in with their books, then we have a standardized set of questions which relates to the review timing, the object, the process, and so on. Then standard answers are then reflected further down the line in the metadata of the books. So there's this small logo, peer-reviewed, certified by DOAB, which hyperlinks to the information which the author and the readers and so on can see. Now, while all these infrastructures are openly available, they come at no cost to end users, including libraries, of course. We don't charge anything for using it. In fact, we really encourage any library to make use of the books on the platforms, and there are no registrations needed either. Of course, operating infrastructures come at a cost, and we have a funding model for this, and we receive support from a number of libraries and consortia across the world, and we are very grateful for that. And we also receive membership fees from publishers and some fees from services that we provide to funders. We adhere to the principles of open scholarly infrastructure. And then just finally, how we also really like to engage with libraries. So we have our annual meeting for supporting libraries coming up end of this month. And that's an annual meeting and where we want to share our technical developments and our roadmap for technical developments and get input and feedback. And we also have an annual stakeholder report, newsletters, and so on that we share with the library community. And we plan to set up a library advisory committee beginning next year, also to be in closer contact with the library community. And finally, just to also let you know that we are a core member of the Opera's research infrastructure. This is a European research infrastructure which is dedicated to open science in the humanities and social sciences. And OAPEN was a co-founder of this infrastructure, which is growing and working with a lot of focus on books, but also other open science issues like data and code, etc. So that was my presentation, and now over to Jeff Edmunds from Penn State University Libraries. The floor is yours, Jeff, please.
Thank you, Niels. I'm going to be speaking about DOAB from a practical standpoint as a library person. and what we've done here at Penn State. The first point I wanted to make, though, is that for those of you who are at institutions who are used to OA and have been kind of at the forefront, this will come as no surprise to you. For others, I wanted to start with a conceptual statement about how open access kind of falls outside the box of what libraries are traditionally kind of used to doing when it comes to acquiring and managing content. And it confounds 3 or 4 different traditional library functions that you see listed on the slide. You've got selection. Traditionally, a subject specialist or a selector or bibliography will find material that they wish to add to the collection and then initiate the process of acquiring it. It then goes to usually an acquisitions department, which is used to doing such things as contacting vendors or publishers, paying invoices, receiving materials. And that stream then feeds into a cataloging department or a metadata department to make those things that have been acquired discoverable in the various discovery layers at the library. And then finally, there is a curation or maintenance aspect down the road to make sure that things are where they need to be and remain where they need to be. Open access is difficult for some libraries and institutions simply because it kind of subverts that normal process. Given that open access materials are by definition free and are DRM free, unless they can be fed into this process in a rethought way, they're likely to fall outside of it. And that kind of makes getting on board with OA a little bit tricky at the outset because the workflows are not tooled to accept it. So next slide, Niels. What we do here at Penn State, this will come as no surprise to some of you. For others, I hope it's news. As Niels showed on an earlier slide, the DOAB metadata is fed to the discovery service provider, such as ProQuest or EBSCO or OCLC. And the first and most obvious way of getting these materials into your catalog or your discovery layer is to simply activate the DOAB collection in your knowledge base. On the left, you see the Serial Solutions Ex Libris Client Center, which is what we use here at Penn State because we're a ProQuest summon library for our discovery layer. And then on the right, you see the WorldShare Collection Manager example for how to activate DOAB in that knowledge base. I wanted to make a couple points here. One is that this is very easy to do if this is your discovery provider, if you're a summon school or a library or a WorldShare library. It's very easy to do this. You will see, probably it's not clearly visible on the slides, but the totals in the 2 collections will be different. And that's something I'm going to mention further on about managing the metadata and the speed with which the metadata can be managed so that you always know you're up to date is an issue. The other thing to note is that if you do activate these collections in the knowledge base, there are basically 2 flavors of doing that, at least for us here at Penn State. You could activate the knowledge in the collection in the knowledge base and then ensure that the DOA books are discoverable in your discovery layer. You can also elect to have MARC records delivered to you so that you can load them into your catalog. Various libraries take various approaches to whether they want these to be discoverable in their catalog and their discovery layer, or if you have a preference where you are. Some people say just discovery layer is fine. We're not going to worry about loading the records into the catalog. We do both here at Penn State for reasons that I'll go over shortly. Next slide. So the procedure we use here at Penn State is probably one that not many other libraries do because it requires an extra step or 2. And that is to go to the metadata feed directly at DOAB, which Niels mentioned in one of the earlier slides. This shows the site. And as he mentioned, there are various flavors of metadata that you can download. There's Onyx, there's MARC XML, there's comma delimited files, and there's Research Information Systems RIS format. Now, as a library, we're most comfortable with MARC, so we grab the MARC XML file, which is simply a translation or transformation of the Onyx data that DOAB receives from publishers through the various channels that Niels mentioned earlier. And then what we do with that MARC XML is we transform it into MARC, we enhance it using various scripts that we've developed primarily using MarcEdit, a freeware package developed by Terry Reese, so that the records are as good as we can make them before we load them into our catalog. Working with OAPEN and DOAB over the past 2 years, they've been very amenable to improving the metadata that they have from publishers however they can. And one of the things that they've done that has been really nice for us is they've started including open access tags in the records. So for those of you familiar with MARC speak, there are certain fields in a MARC record, in this case, the 506 field, sometimes a 540 field for licensing information, and subfields in the 856 field, which is where the link to the content resides. And OAPEN and DOAB have actually populated those fields with open access tags so that these things can be identified as open access materials in a way that would not be possible were those tags not present. Next slide, please, Niels. So the implications for this in our catalog are as follows. We're in the process of sunsetting our old catalog, which was based on the WebCat that Circe Dynex uses for its public interface. And we're moving to a blacklight instance, which is the right-hand part of the slide. What I wanted you to make aware of is, number one, the presence of the open access label on these materials so that users, when they find these results, can see immediately that these are open access items. The second thing I wanted to mention on the right side of the screen is we've implemented in our new catalog an open access facet. It's actually labeled as free to read. After a lot of discussion, we realized that our users don't really make a distinction between something that's freely available online and something that's what we would call true open access and has a Creative Commons license associated with it. So that facet allows people to limit their searches by everything that has those open access tags in them, which allows people to call things up and sort that way in a way that would not be possible had we not included that open access metadata in the records. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was part of what we do to the MARC records after we grab them from DOAB is to insert a local field so that we can retrieve them all in a batch. We just put a field in the MARC record that says DOAB library, which allows our users, if they want to search through the entire DOAB collection in the context of our catalog, can do so simply by searching that as a title. Now, to go back to this slide I had, you don't have to move the slide, Niels, but I'm going to refer back to the earlier slide simply by saying that if you choose simply to activate these collections in a knowledge base, the things you will not get, and which may be of value to you, are you will not have any of the enhancements that you can do locally if you download the records from the DOAB site and make the enhancements yourself, nor will you get open access tags. That was kind of a point of contention for us because we really wanted our discovery provider to have open access tags in the MARC data, and they told us they would not be able to do that simply because of the amount of resources they had to put at that particular issue. So the things that you're able to find in your discovery layer from DOAB are not likely to be obviously open access. Now, I know that some discovery layers have open access facets, but these can be deceptive for a number of reasons that I won't have time to go in to here now. So we feel at Penn State that doing it with a more hands-on approach gives us more control over the metadata and more control over the speed. Again, referring to back that what's available in the knowledge base silos, often there's a time lag because the flow of data, as Niels showed on that slide with all the silos, data takes time to flow from one silo to the next. And if I want to have the quickest feedback from the DOAB site, it makes sense for me to go to that site and download the MARC XML directly, which is something I do every month. And I could even do it more frequently if I were to choose to do that. My experience has been that both OAPEN and DOAB are growing by literally hundreds of titles a month. So I like to get those materials into our catalog as quickly as possible. Next slide. So finally, challenges and looking forward. This is going to come as no surprise to anyone who's a cataloger or used to working with metadata. Metadata quality is always an issue. As Niels said, DOAB tries to provide the highest quality metadata it's able to. That said, their metadata is a transformation of the ONIX or other metadata provided by publishers, and that can always be improved. Granularity is an interesting issue. There was an interesting session yesterday about open access, and one of the things that came up was the fact that open access monographs are increasingly fragmented into chapters, and DOIs are being assigned at the chapter level rather than simply to the monograph level, which is something libraries are not used to dealing with. We're most comfortable cataloging something at a book level rather than a chapter level. So that's a shift in the ecosystem that we're going to have to become more comfortable with. Authority control, also known as identity management. Much of the metadata that I've seen coming from publishers and from vendors has not been through an authority control process. So in order to make sure that the headings in the records, the name headings, the corporate headings, the subject headings are in an authoritative form, that requires extra work. Versioning, I found out only recently that in DOAB, publishers have the opportunity to upload successive versions of the same thing, which are then saved as separate versions as reflected in the record ID. That's something we're not used to, and we haven't really figured out a way of dealing with it yet, because we're used to adding to our collection, but not necessarily overwriting existing parts of the collection. And then staying up to date. That's what I mentioned a moment ago. If you go with the knowledge base route, there's going to be some lag time. If you go with downloading the records yourself, you're guaranteed that you're getting this stuff as soon as it's available in DOAB. So the right-hand quality is kind of a mirror image of the left, and I've already spoken about most of it. One of the things we're looking to towards the future is a feedback loop whereby if someone like me here at Penn State improves the quality of the metadata and the MARC records, that could be fed back to DOAB so that it's available to other institutions. And then that MARC could be hosted at the DOAB site, exactly as the MARC XML metadata is now. And finally, my last point is it would be great to see better collocation of DOAB titles in WorldCat. Anyone who's ever searched WorldCat knows that it's extremely difficult, although there are records available for virtually all of these materials at some point down the road. It's very difficult to simply recall them in a batch in WorldCat itself. And it would be nice to be able to do that for libraries who want to take advantage of the existence of the records and load them into their own catalogs without going through a knowledge base. So that's all I have. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jennifer, and she's going to talk about the experience at the University of Michigan.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Meekhof, and I am going to take a step way back and talk about creating metadata and MARC records before these resources are ever even published. So one of my teams in technical services at the University of Michigan Library is working with Michigan Publishing, who is increasingly creating more and more open access resources. And I've put in a little screenshot of their collection with DOAB here. So we are working with them to create MARC records before the resources are published. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that, the workflow, and a little bit about where all the metadata goes. Next slide, please. So this is our workflow, our primary workflow. We get a spreadsheet of titles for new resources that are going to be published. From Michigan Publishing, they send us a spreadsheet that includes the metadata that they have and a pre-publication version. My catalogers then take that metadata and they create MARC records from it. And we're currently doing that work in OCLC Connection so that when Michigan Publishing shares the metadata with WorldShare, that the OCN is present as a matching point. When when our records are complete, we pull them out of the system and do a little batch processing on them in MarcEdit. And then we also convert MARC records to MARC XML and upload 2 versions of one record to a shared location for both technical services, Michigan Publishing, and Michigan Publishing customers. The other workflow that we have, one example would be when Michigan Publishing was starting the UMP EBC, they sent me a big list of backfile titles, and I worked with one of our systems folks to identify all those titles in our catalog, pull them out. It was a combination of print and electronic. So I stripped all of the print, all of the electronic information out using MarcEdit, stripped all of the University of Michigan, all of our local practice out, and added information back to make them all electronic, all Michigan Publishing specific, and then put them in that shared location. We've used both of these workflows to do other University of Michigan press collections and projects. Next slide, please. So here is a very brief list of the metadata that Michigan Publishing and Technical Services is sharing back and forth. Michigan Publishing gives us a lot of the basic information about their publications. And since these are pre-publication, the DOI and the pub date are included, anticipated pub date. Some of the resources have supplemental materials, so we do create 7xx fields for additional audio files, images, or more words. And then the open access information we only get from Michigan Publishing. We take that information and we, like Jeff said, we create a 506 for the type of access. We create a 536 if there's a funder associated with the resource, then a 542 for the Creative Commons license type. And then we also do an 856 subfield 7 with an input of 0 to identify that it's an open access URL. We don't do the subfield 7 for non-open access. I don't know why, but we don't. But then we also take that DOI and we create an 024 field, as well as use it for the URL in the 856 so that there's a constant, easy to manage URL going on there. Next slide, please. Here I've created a screenshot of our CIP portal as part of an example of maintaining and sharing our metadata. One of the things we found in the beginning was that sometimes we'd miss a title to catalog, or Michigan Publishing might forget to send it. So they created an alert system that looks within the file of MARC records and looks for the DOIs. And if a DOI is not present, a set group of people get an email with that DOI, the ISBN, and the title. I've shared our view of our CIP portal because we started submitting CIP for Michigan Publishing. Usually, so they submit the request to Library of Congress, the CIP, cataloging in publication data. They submit the request to Library of Congress, and then we get that request and we go in and we take the records we've already created and use that metadata to submit the CIP information. And it ends up being a really great check on that email mechanism for missing titles, because if a title is missing, we'll get a CIP request and we don't have a MARC record. So it works out really well and circumnavigates those emails every now and then. Another thing that happens is sometimes customers find mistakes in our MARC records, and that's okay because my catalogers are human and I don't expect them to be perfect. So if that happens, we go in, we find the record, pull it out, fix it, and put it back, and it's available for everybody. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a view of our library search. It's a homegrown discovery layer. We initially, when we started this, we were creating the records in our ILS, and we'd suppress them. And then when we'd search for when the titles were available and unsuppress them. And managing electronic resources on a title by title basis is not a great idea. So we switched to loading the records the way that all other libraries do, well, in a way. And that's also a good way for us to know that if we have any problems loading the metadata, other places are going to have problems loading the metadata. So we like doing it that way better, so we don't have to manage title by title. All of this is to say that this process is ever changing. I do take a continuous improvement approach to it. You know, we have discussed with publishing at looking at the metadata that they have to enhance the records we create even more, like table content notes and adding a 505 to enhance keyword searching. We also just moved one of our librarians in technical services into an open access metadata librarian position. And she is a point of liaison between Michigan Publishing and us, and providing that metadata perspective to them, overseeing the cataloging project for us. She represents open access on internal committees, and I am going to soon be teaching her about the loading process and making sure that she is well aware of how metadata goes to discovery services and more about the supply chain for open access. I think what I really want to emphasize out of my portion of our talk today is that this is all possible because of a really strong relationship between technical services and Michigan Publishing. We could not create the metadata we do without the information that they have. And I like to think they think the same of us. So with that, a shout out to Michigan Publishing and a thank you to Michigan Publishing. Thank you to everybody for listening to us today. And I think we're going to open it up to some questions now.
Yes. Thank you very much, Jennifer and Jeff. And I wonder if we have some questions there already.
We do have several questions in the Pathable chat, Niels. Yep. And Charles Watkinson has been good enough to answer some of them. The first question was from Maya Desjardins, pardon my French pronunciation. When it comes to having DOIs for each chapter, it seems reasonably confusing to users, but I often see it listed as best practice. Is it still recommended? Now, I should probably read Charles's answer, and then anyone else who wants to respond can. Charles says, Maya, while Michigan Publishing doesn't do it yet, I think DOIs at chapter level are very important, especially because many books are edited collections, and each of the contributors needs a DOI to get proper recognition. If the chapter level DOIs use a syntax that connect them to the work DOI, the confusion can be reduced. There was another question from Carol Ward, 536 for funder. I guess this is directed at you, Jennifer. What does this look like, and when and why is it significant?
Well, we input the 536 for funder when Michigan Publishing tells us that there was a funder associated with that open access resource. So it's not information we would know otherwise. And what we do is we just look up the authority record for that funder, assuming it exists, and then input it in the 536 as it would look in the authority field.
Okay, there's
that
a
way
question.
They're getting credit too. Sorry.
Understood. There's a question from Laura Vogler. She asks, are all the DOAB books represented in WorldCat, and would it be wrong to assume each of the books has the 506 OA tag? And I responded in chat to her. I'll read it out loud in case people haven't seen it. Laura, not all. And yes, it is wrong to assume that they have a 506 tag. Most do not. OCLC has a vendor-neutral approach to ebook records, which means that not all instances of an ebook may be open access. So let's see, I think there was one other. Actually, I think that's all I have in Pathable right now.
There is a comment from Linda Barr. I see she says, as a college who will have predominantly OA users rather than creators, I'm interested in discussion around the identifiers for OA versus pay when it's in a one search discovery system. Jeff or Jennifer, what do you think about that?
Well, that I'm not sure I fully understand your question, Linda, when you say a one search discovery system. Here at Penn State, what we can do in the catalog is different from what we can do in the discovery layer, because with the discovery layer, we're beholden to ProQuest and what it is able or willing to do. In our catalog, we have much more control. So that's why we've added the MARC tags and created the open access / free to read facet, which allows people to identify and target just those materials.
Thanks, Jeff. Jennifer, do you have any?
Yeah, our discovery layer is new-ish, so we don't yet have those filters to identify open access. I would love to have them because it would make it easier to find things, but I'm confident it is in development and we will get them some point. Clarification, is there a need to identify OA in the discovery system for users?
Thanks, Jennifer. And I see that we have a question in the ballroom. Please.
Hi, this is Laura Ricci from Clark and Esposito. Thanks so much for a great presentation today. This has been so informative. I've learned so much. Niels, I'm wondering, this is sort of a two-part question. I'm thinking about the pilot that you were describing about peer review metadata for OA books. I think that's so interesting and such a valuable piece of information. I'm curious about, for the folks that are on the end of supplying metadata, what the experience has been with that. Is that information that publishers are able to share in large quantities? Are you working more with a smaller group of publishers who have that information ready? And are there any specific challenges there? And for the folks that are more downstream and working on the discovery side, is that information useful in your mind if that's something that more providers are able to share?
Okay, thanks for the question. So I can tell something about, let's say, upstream, and then perhaps Jeff or Jennifer can talk about the downstream. So we are currently testing the workflow and getting feedback from a few publishers, a variety of different publishers, actually including University of Michigan Press, but also a number of other types of publishers, to see how the workflow goes, but also to get feedback on how they want, what information do they want to provide. And so far it's been really good feedback. So I think one of the input we got, which I would have expected, is that besides from the let's say ticking boxes, we have standard questions and there are standard answer possibilities. Some would also like to see, be able to give some more elaborate information on the peer review, because as we know with books, the peer review process can be quite diverse depending on the type of book, the discipline, the language area, etc. So that's information we are gathering now while we are testing, and then we hope to roll out the service slowly during next year and get even more feedback, and then also with the scientific committee that we have set up, discuss things as we go by. Jeff or Jennifer, would you have any comments on the downstream, sort of how to receive that information as metadata?
Well, I guess I would say we're happy to receive it. I mean, greater standardization and the better the metadata is that we get downstream, the happier we are. One thing that's come out of the sessions earlier in yesterday's conference and a previous event a few weeks ago was how all these stakeholders, it really behooves them to talk more so that we're all on the same page in terms of metadata and metadata flows. I know that's kind of a vague response, but
Okay, thank you. Thanks. And I'm keeping an eye on the clock and see that we have now arrived at the time where we should close this session. Thank you all for joining the session. I hope it has been informative to you, and thanks to Jennifer and Jeff for your presentations and for being on this panel. And I wish you all a continued very good day and a good conference. Thank you all.